Venters on May 13th, 2022, Maywood, Illinois Mayor Nathaniel George Booker was actually asleep on the Kennedy Expressway in downtown Chicago when police woke him up by knocking on his window. Apparently, he went to a function where he ended up drinking a little bit too much. So much so that on the middle of the expressway, he literally pulled to the side, or he might have even been in the middle of the street. But either way, there's not really anywhere to go when you're on the expressway. And he just turned off his car and fell asleep. So the police go there and they're knocking on the window and they're getting him out of the car. And where for most people, they would probably be a little bit stern, probably a little bit aggressive, right? In the mayor's case, they treated him like he was the Queen of Sheba. I mean, literally, might as well have been the king of the world the way they treated him. Asking him if it's okay if they do some sobriety tests, right? Basically kissing his butt the whole way. Meanwhile, in the background, you hear car after car honking like crazy. You can imagine them sticking their head out the window saying, "Move this a-hole," right? And it's just like, wow, I don't know what it is. But every time we talk about Chicago, it seems like it's one of their elected officials acting like a criminal and getting away with it. Like, seriously, think about this, guys. When we talk about Philly or Houston or California, we're talking about legit criminals. When we talk about Chicago, we're always talking about Mayor Dalton or the governor, or in this case, Mayor Booker. And it's always the same situation. How the heck can you have a good state and city government there in Chicago and Illinois itself when your leadership is worse than the criminals themselves? It's like, holy moly, how do these people always rise to the top and get voted in by the citizens of Chicago and by the people in Illinois? It's amazing. You couldn't write a book and people would never believe it if literally every person in leadership was basically breaking the law and constantly getting away with it. The police treated him like he was a king. He was obviously drunk from the fundraiser. When they spoke to him, his speech was completely slurred. And the reason they treated him so nice is because he was literally blocking the highway. And it's like, I understand he's the mayor. Maybe he's your boss. I don't know. But I do know one thing. He's breaking the law. You know he can't drive. Get him out of there. I'm telling you, when you see the video, because I'll link it here, it's one of those things where it's just like, it's kind of disgusting to see how little they think of the people, because you can't think highly of the people if you just constantly get away with doing this crap. That happened on May 13th of 2022. But check this out, just a few short months later, on July 19th of 2022, the suspension of his license had been rescinded for a lack of evidence. I mean, he literally has a video of it out, and it just came out now. And from what I understand, he tried fighting the release of that video because he says that it was a political operation against him, because I think he's running for mayor again. The mayor of Maywood, excuse me. He's running for the mayor of Maywood again. Here's what's backwards about the people in Chicago and Illinois altogether. It seems like the worse that a mayor or a governor act, it seems like the higher their popularity is there. I don't know if that's for true, but my goodness, it seems like they can never do any wrong. It really does. Who was that lawyer that was all on the news? Remember, she was the one that she was dating one of her lawyers underneath her. They were actually dating and spending a bunch of money. It was, I don't remember who it was, Maybe I'll remember it and type it on the screen later, but the point is, she ended up getting reelected. I think she was like the district attorney of somewhere. You guys know who I'm talking about. It was all on the news over the past year or two, how she was trying to get Trump in trouble. And then she ended up getting reelected. It's like, you gotta be kidding me. To be honest with you, I think that's why people get away with a lot of things in this country. You ever hear about a high school coach or a high school teacher, and maybe they're doing something weird with the students? So they disappear, they go away, right? They get caught, they do a small sentence or whatever. Before you know it, you hear stories of them going to other schools in other part of the country, and you're like, how the heck did they manage to get a school teacher job again? And for some way, somehow, things happen. And that's how a lot of these politicians are. They disappear for a couple years. Pretty soon you can't remember their name, and then they pop up, they win a seat or they win an election somewhere, right? And before you know it, you're like, what was that person's name? And you just can't remember it because they're not in the news every single day. They just had their 15 minutes of fame. But then you end up hearing about them and you're like, oh, they got reelected even after they looked like an absolute fool on TV every day while in court. They just looked silly. They got reelected. Yeah, the people feel like she was really good at battling against the orange man's team. So they voted her back in. Just kind of blows you away. But it happens. That Mayor Henyard, who I always say is a real beautiful mayor, she ought to do something positive with her life. A couple weeks back, I see her and she's like literally in a brawl with other people. Did you see that? It's like, where do they get these characters from? How the heck could a person that's that's actively fighting in brawls, how did they ever control themselves enough to go through, college and grad school and get into politics? I mean, how do those two worlds ever come together? Just really blows you away. That just goes to show you there are no limitations in this country. No matter how wacky and goofy and backwards your upbringing is, you can always some way, somehow find a place like Chicago, Houston, or Philly that'll vote you into power. Therefore, just like Obama, he came up through Chicago. Therefore, you can literally become the president of the free world and therefore the most powerful person on the planet, no matter how much goofy, irritating things you do in life. That is just a horrible thing, but it's true. So many of us throughout our time on this planet are going to feel like there's this ceiling that's invisible, this glass ceiling, if you will, that we can't burst through. And then you watch things on TV and you just think, how the hell did that happen? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is no ceiling ahead of me. Maybe the sky is the limit. Because if Tiffany Henyard can become the mayor of Dalton, I can become president of the world, right? It's got to be a simulation. We're in a simulation. It's supposed to look like everything is right there at your fingertips, but you can't quite grasp it. That's what this world is. It's a goofy video game that doesn't make any sense. And just like the end of each level on the video games we used to play as kids, remember each level had a boss. And the first couple bosses are easy to defeat. But then as you keep going, you start to see that bosses get stronger and stronger. That's what happens in our simulation. Some way, somehow, most of the bullies and the goofy people of the world get stopped by life itself. But then you have certain people, like the leadership in places like Chicago and the surrounding areas, where no matter what they do, they can rise above it even without changing to become a better person. Usually when people rise above their circumstances, they actually become a better version of themselves. In Illinois, it's like the exact opposite. They just become a more accentuated version of what they've always been. People that should have nothing to do with leading other people. That's what doesn't make sense to me. We have a guy in the office right now, we'll call him the Orange Man. Nobody can really stand him, but when he's in charge, it seems like countries around the world actually treat us with respect. When you take him out, you can tell by all these things that Doge finds. It sounds like what we do is we just pay off everybody around the world by giving them outrageous amounts of money. It's like a giant Ponzi scheme every time presidents are in charge other than the Orange Man. Oh my God, Jesse, are you wearing orange today? I am. Holy moly. God, I'm telling you, the mafia must own Chicago and Illinois. How the hell can Illinois be such a backward state from the leadership on down? Think about this. I live in Arizona. You live in Nevada. You live in Massachusetts. You live in Georgia. All of our states have had politicians that are a little bizarre or weird. But in Chicago, it's almost like there's no such thing as a good politician. Even this Blagojevich guy that's supposedly on our side now, I mean, even he was iffy as all hell, right? I mean, it's like, does anything positive come out of Illinois other than Abraham Lincoln? And isn't Abraham Lincoln falsely given credit for being Illinois' boy? Wasn't he really like a Kentucky kid? You guys tell me down below. Was Abraham Lincoln a product of Kentucky or Illinois, or am I remembering everything false and he's from another state altogether? J.C. Mount says elected officials should have enhanced penalties. JC, you just hit the nail right on the head. When you're in charge, you should hold yourself to a higher level. And people in charge are always trying to get the people that elect them, they're always trying to get us on public transportation. JC, don't you think it would be wonderful if this mayor ended up agreeing to take public transportation for the rest of his life? Because God knows people that drink and drive don't really deserve to be given the right to drive. By the way, when I was in my 20s, there were a couple moments where I actually drank and drove home and luckily never got pulled over. Looking back at the man that I am now, I look back at that and I'm ashamed because that was no different than what the mayor's doing here. Jesse, does that mean you should give up your license? Sometimes we do things when we're younger that we might say, hey, I don't have any regrets. I would have done everything the same. Well, not me. Would you have driven drunk all those times if you could redo it? Not me. That's nothing to be proud of. Even now, there's people, probably a couple venters over the last year that had 2 or 3 drinks and their spouse said, hey, can you run up to the store real quick and get some ingredients for our barbecue? People drive a little tipsy all the time, but we all know, individually, collectively, the whole 9 yards, we all know that it's wrong. We shouldn't do it. Same thing with the seatbelt. How many times you going up to the store that's literally at the end of the street and you don't feel like wearing your seatbelt? Well, guys, most accidents occur within like 1.5 miles of your home. That's the most important time to wear a seatbelt. That's why people perish, and you're like, why didn't they have their seatbelt on? Tuffy40 says, this is absolutely reckless and insane. Regardless of your political party, you should be fired immediately. That's the thing that was so gross about it. Guys, there was literally like 3 or 4 cops that were talking to the mayor. And they're sitting there talking to the mayor like he's a 5-year-old kid. And they weren't doing it to talk down to him. It's because that's how inebriated he sounded. It was really pathetic, like he really could have hurt somebody, including himself. And he was basically, every time he did speak, it was very slurred and erratic, right? And it was just really disappointing because I have a feeling if it was you, me, or anybody else, we would have been treated a lot less gentle. But I guess over there, you know, if it's the mayor or the governor or whatever, I guess you just have to kiss their ass. It was really kind of pathetic. So I don't expect you guys to remember this, but up here as I'm about to turn left to go down this street that I usually go through on our walk, there used to be a bus seat and bench, and it was a nice one, and it was right here. And I just noticed that they took it down and they moved it X amount of streets that way. And they also put one across the street right there. The reason I mention that is I wonder if that's maybe a strategy. You know, if you have some of these homeless people and they're sleeping at the bus stops, which they do here in Phoenix a lot, to the point where people that use the bus can't even sit down at the bus stop. I wonder if that's why they keep moving them. Because after a while, some homeless people start to say, this is my house, this is where I live. And maybe the best, nicest, smoothest way to try to eliminate that is just to subtly move their home a couple of streets down in either direction. I don't know if it's a strategy. Maybe they just like to give other streets a chance at a chair. Maybe somebody in my neighborhood called the bus portion of ADOT, right, and said, hey, I take the bus, can you give me a place to sit? And maybe they moved it over there. I don't know. If any of you guys take the bus where you live and you have an idea of why they're moving the bus bench, let me know. Andrew J. says, oh look, a politician with money and influence being treated better than everyone else and not being held accountable for their actions. I've never seen that before, right? Now, for all I know, Andrew could live anywhere in the country. He might even live right there in Chicago or in Illinois. But it is kind of crappy when every single one of your leaders constantly gets out of trouble because of who they are. And I know you guys are thinking, well, what about Orange Man? Half the things we hear that you guys mention about Orange Man end up being bullshit. So what about him? My goodness. I believe the governor of Illinois, I forget his name. What is it, Brandon Tom? I forget his name. Anyway, I believe the governor of Illinois, last week, he was on videos on YouTube too, because apparently he has a room that was right behind him in the interview. It was so odd. They're like, hey, in that room right behind you, there's a lot of gifts and stuff that companies give, and there's rumors that there's checks and money and the whole 9 yards in there. What's that about? And he didn't even want to let people see in the room. It's like, golly, this sounds criminal to me. I'm surprised the people of Chicago don't like collectively stand up and say, we don't want to be a part of this anymore. Seriously, like, what's wrong with Chicago? If you're from Chicago, I apologize. I don't want to come across as picking on you. Same with people in Houston or Philly. But my God, what is wrong with your guys' cities? They're just awful. Crafty 989 says, yeah, there is a real lack of evidence to support a DUI charge. I mean, come on, folks. Who hasn't fallen asleep while driving and just thrown it in park in the middle of a highway? I agree completely. That's something that if someone told you that happened, you would be thinking, oh my God, that must be a guy that has a real problem with alcohol and drugs. You wouldn't be thinking, that's the guy I voted for mayor. Hey, you know Mayor Karen Bass of Los Angeles? Apparently, even if they would have recalled her and made her step down, Gavin Newsom would have named a replacement. So in other words, you would have been getting rid of Karen Bass for just another person like Karen Bass. That's what's so scary about your guys' cities. Even if you're Democrat, it should scare you, because there might be a day in the future where you might want to flip sides. You can't flip sides in those cities and in those states. They are forever blue. So if there's ever something that you do disagree with your government about, you're kind of screwed. There's absolutely nothing you can do to change anything. That's scary. And the only thing that'll change it is when something affects you. Peccatum DEI says refusing to complete the field sobriety test because the mayor wouldn't take it and the breathalyzer is an automatic license suspension most everywhere in the country. I don't know if it is or not. I'd imagine it is, unless you have a good lawyer. That's the thing that's so crazy, is this guy ended up getting his license back 2 or 3 months later, and he never got in trouble for it. I mean, I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like somebody that you would necessarily want running your city. With that being said, maybe Maywood, Illinois is just a really small city and it doesn't really matter anyways. I mean, I'm not going to lose sleep over it, are you guys? I remember when we went out to Illinois to visit with in-laws. I'm used to Arizona where everything's straight lines and 90-degree angles. And out there, their freeway system was like a bunch of loops where you would actually drive past the point that you wanted to go, and then it would loop back around. It seemed really bizarre, but I'd imagine if you grow up in it, you get used to it pretty quickly. But oh my God, it was kind of tough driving out there to places. It was unique. Guys, I wanted to talk with you real quick for the last couple minutes I have with you about another video that I saw, and I have a feeling you guys might have seen this as well. It was it was President Trump at a podium, and he was talking about this, that, and the other involving males and female sports. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, he asks if the governor of Maine is present. And then all of a sudden he looks to his right, and there she is, the governor of Maine. At least I think it was Maine. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it was the governor of Maine. And he was basically saying, are you going to follow suit like the NCAA did and immediately withdraw men from female sports? And she goes, we're going to obey the laws of the state and the federal level. And he goes, well, I am the federal level. And if you don't follow these rules, I'm going to yank your funding. And she goes, well, we'll see you in court. And the reason I bring it up is because I just kind of find it fascinating. The reason I find it fascinating is because sometimes there's a little hypocrisy. I'm on the side that I don't want to see men in sports, but the hypocrisy thing is kind of on the Democrat side for this. Let me explain. When it comes to Roe versus Wade, a lot of times Trump and the Republicans will say, well, listen, all we did was we took that decision from the federal level and we gave it to the states. With this trans athlete situation, it's kind of hypocritical because now what he's talking about is taking that power away from the states and giving it to him at the federal level. So this is one of those things where your boy is kind of torn, and I'd love your opinion on it because you see, there's a big piece of me that says, yes, I'm tired of seeing men in women's sports. But how can you argue that you want states to have that individual power, right, to make their own decisions, but then at the same time, you're not wanting to let them have that power to make their own decisions? With that being said, what's really important is that we all walk and try to be as healthy as we can, because whoever is here in regards to our friends and family, I'd like to stay here for a long time, and I'm sure you would too. So I'll see you again tomorrow. Have a good night.